Welcome to this very, very important conversation we are going to have about mental health in particular and the topic of suicide through John's new book, Profiles in Hope. But by way of introduction, I'm not going to read out John's bio. I'm actually going to get him to share a bit of his story with you guys very, very shortly. But look, in essence, a lot of you would already know of John Brogden, especially if we've got lots of people that are around our age group in the room. So it would be fair to say that most people would have heard of John, would have become a household name through his life in politics. John had a successful career in politics insofar as, in particular, he was the youngest person in Australia to ever lead a major political party at the age of 33, the state opposition, correct? Which is an amazing achievement. I'll get him to share a little bit about that shortly, but he's gone on since then to have a very successful life in business. But in particular, and what's very important about today is that John's also a former chair of Lifeline Australia and an honorary president of Lifeline International as well. And on World Suicide Day, I noticed it was this year that John's book was actually published for the first time in Australia and New Zealand. And so I would like everyone to give a warm welcome to John. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Mate, congratulations on the book. I've obviously read it.
I thought you were going to put handcuffs on
yeah.
me. I was a bit worried. Didn't know what was going to happen there.
No phone books, or this is pretty heavy.
The old days. Yeah, good on you.
Look, I've obviously read the book. You can buy a copy of this afterwards. I really encourage you to do so. It's an awesome resource, particularly the fact that, look, I'm a massive advocate for shared lived experiences in most topics, but particularly when it comes to mental health. I mean, that's what I do these days. Your copy won't come with as many of these little sticky notes in it, but there's a few things I do want to draw upon today, John, to talk about this book and some of the topics and themes that are actually raised in it. But before we do you mind just, look, this book is about 15 other people, Australian, some of them are household names, some of them are not. All people who have had their own battles with suicide and some suicide survivors. But mate, you're here, and I reckon everyone would love to hear a little bit about your story as well, if you don't mind sharing some of that.
Well, firstly, Craig, thanks for interviewing me today, and thanks to the team here for the opportunity to come along. It is the first time I've been to Pearl Beach, but we used to holiday at Woy Woy, Nettlong. You know, what a very Sydney story. And Mum was one of 9, so we'd be holidaying, sharing a house with Auntie Colleen or whatever it might be. And you know, they were the good old days. You know, leave home when the sun came up with no shoes on, and eat Devon sandwiches in the middle of summer with tomato sauce and white bread. Talk about a human rights violation. And you know, come home when it was dinner time, and you ate whichever house you're at. You ate at Auntie Wattis's names or Uncle, so it was wonderful. And it's so much so that Mum's side, the Bourne family, I dedicate the book to my wife and to my grandmother Brenda Bourne. The Bourne family now has an annual family reunion, and I don't know whether other people use this phrase at the Ettalong RSL titled "Get Along to Ettalong." So that'll be March next year. So thanks for the opportunity. I do want to say hello to Ros Crick, who's a local teacher who was part of our bridal party. Our son Hugh's here. And Russell, I saw Russell Grove on the way in. So Russell, who lives up here now, I think he told me he was on the Progress Association, was the clerk of the Parliament, the New South Wales Legislative Assembly, which is a fantastic job because you have to sit there listening to complete drivel your entire life and keep a straight face and advise members of Parliament like me. So he's well and truly retired up here, but was a... Yes, that's right. That's right. And I learned something, Craig, as a Member of Parliament, which is the clerks have to be completely neutral. That's their job, completely neutral to a T. So I learned something from Russell, which is, John, you have to ask me the right question to get the right answer. So you would often ask the wrong question and he couldn't answer it. So you had to sit back and think, well, fine, and work out how to ask questions. Preferably ask a question that would require him to answer rather than just say yes or no. So thanks again for being here, for the opportunity to be here. So look, I'm 55 years old. I live with suicidal ideation and depression. I'm medicated for those, and I see a psychologist on a regular basis. You'll all probably know what depression is. I'd have a mild level of depression. But suicidal ideation or suicidal ideation is the formal. Any health workers here? Any psychologists, psychiatrists? Oh, good, okay. That means I won't get it wrong in front of them. I'll be corrected. So for me, it means part of my makeup, I often say, sort of in the back of my head, is that when things go wrong for me, usually personally and emotionally wrong for me, personally, not in my business life or in my professional life, but when they go wrong for me personally, if they go very wrong and I catastrophise them, I begin to think about suicide. So that leads me to a number of things we might talk about later about how do I avoid that situation. So, look, I was born in Balmain in 1969. That was the last year the Balmain Tigers won the grand final. Mum says half of Balmain was conceived on the night of the grand final. So I have to tell you I was born, not conceived, in 1969. And, Mum was one of 9 kids, classic old school Balmain Labor voting, working class sort of people. Dad is a New Zealander, came over here in 1960 for 6 months and has never gone back. Dad's very working class family in a place called Harawa in New Plymouth, Taranaki area. And Dad's a carpenter. So Mum was a school secretary, Dad was a carpenter. And Mum was very much of that generation. There might be some of you in this room whose expectation in life is you leave school early, get married, have 3 kids and be a secretary for the rest of your life. And she was very much of that generation. Mum died a couple of years ago, but if she was born 20 or 30 years later, she was a school secretary, she would have been a school principal. But nobody from, I think so there's Nan and Pop, there were 9 kids, 1 died with diphtheria during the Depression. I'm one of 35 grandchildren, and God knows how many great-grandchildren have come off that as well. My cousin and I'm trying to think through this because I'm catching up with him next week, we are the first to get university degrees in that entire family. But the girls were whip smart. Mum was, remember that when they used to skip kids in classes? She skipped a class. She never failed to remind us of that, by the way, when our reports came in. But she never, I don't think she had the life she hoped to have. She never complained about her place in life. Ros, you'll get a laugh out of this as a teacher, but for her, if you had the opportunities in life and you didn't take them, or you took them and you didn't rise to them, she was very, very hard on you. So she was a school secretary, of course, born 1941, so the nuns were very tough on you in terms of grammar and all those sorts of things. So I got a Year 8 English report home. I went to St Patrick's at Strathfield, a Christian Brothers school. Mum was the secretary at Christian Brothers Balmain, and I got the report. You hand it over to your mother, and you think, oh God, I hope it's okay. And had the mark, the grade, and a comment. And the comment said, the English teacher wrote, "John has a flair for English, F-L-A-R-E, a flair for English." And my mother was salivating with excitement, salivating. So she goes, gets a piece of paper, writes this letter to Brother Kerwin. Brother Kerwin was the deputy headmaster. He was the disciplinarian. And Mum said, "You give this to him." I said, "Oh, Mum, I'll just give it to the secretary of the office." No, you give this, you hand this to him. So, I'm scared to death, and I go and find Brother Kerwin and say, "Brother, this is from my mother." Thank you, John. And anyway, 2 days later, Brother Kerwin comes to find me in the playground to give me the letter. I give the letter back. And he had a smile on his face, so I went home that afternoon and I gave it to Mum. And Mum's letter was the world has come to an end, right? English teachers can't spell. The world has come to an end as we know it. So Brother Kerwin said, "Yes, the world has come to an end as we know it, and this will be fixed." Blah blah blah. Brother Kerwin, and he finished by saying, "Thank you, Mrs. Brogden. P.S. My name is spelt." So she had misspelt his name. Mind you, she would laugh more than anyone. But she had the life of that generation of people, and she would have had a very different life born even 20 years later, and certainly very much different today. And she and Dad never got along. You know, we grew up in a house of endless fighting, not physical, but endless fighting, and endless being yelled at as well as kids, and it was very difficult. And interestingly, local story, on one of the holidays when we were up here at Christmas, walking between one rented house and another rented house with family, you know those gravel lanes in Ettalong between the houses at the back? So I was 13, I was walking from one to another, and I thought I was being followed. I remember I thought I was being followed. I'm convinced now it was the noise of the gravel bouncing off the metal fences. But anyway, I thought I was being followed. Got home, said to Mum, I think I was being followed. And she took me to our GP. And he said, "Oh, John, can you go and do a urine test?" And I thought, okay. It was a very clever tactic for a doctor to get me out of the room so he could talk to Mum. So he said, "Oh, is there a lot of fighting at home?" and all that sort of stuff. And so I came back in and Mum said, "Look, we need to get divorced. This is not working." And I've never felt guilty for that. In fact, I was happy they were getting divorced because it was so miserable, and so difficult for us as kids and the like. And you know, Mum would do things like, you know, Dad was a carpenter, worked 5 days a week. You know, that was 2 schooners at lunch and 5 schooners every night. You know, he was of that generation. He has said, you know, probably a functioning alcoholic in his own way. You would have seen that in the cops, you know, that sort of, yeah, that lifestyle. And then he'd go and play golf on a Sunday. I mean, just to put the last nail in the coffin of the relationship, he thought he'd play golf all Sunday. And then we'd come home and I'd have to mow the lawn and Mum would stand in the middle of the street and scream at Dad as he go. It was just terrible. So I was quite pleased about that. But what we discovered is Mum had been seeing a bloke on the side. And when you're young, you think that's terrible, right? When you get older, you realise that's life, you know? And she was miserable in the relationship, and fair enough. So this guy moved in, and what we didn't know until it started happening was he was a serious alcoholic, by which I mean I've never seen a person before or since drink half a bottle of Johnny Walker the way you and I would drink half a bottle of water and keep functioning. He drew Mum into the alcohol as well. And then he what we now call coercive control. He was an expert. So if you're a working class person, your greatest achievement in life is owning your own home. So Mum owned the home, but he held it over her by a series of means. And he turned her against us as kids. He brought her into heavy alcohol drinking. But what he also did, which I didn't find out until the middle of year 12, Mum decided to tell me in the middle of year 12. She came in and, you know, when you're a kid, a boy particularly, you don't understand why your mother wears long dresses in the middle of summer, but he'd been beating her up and he used to hit her in places, he was a real coward, places she could dress over. Never hit her in the face or the like. So I had to carry that. I didn't know, you know, what do you do when you get told that at 17? We had been, for all that period after the divorce, we'd leave home for 2 weeks and come back because it all got too bad, and so it was very disruptive. Then one night I came home from debating on a Friday night. I was the vice captain of my school. I've never recovered from the fact that I wasn't the school captain. It's not a joke, it's real. So you should see the bloke who was captain. Anyway, I came home and I couldn't get in the front door. It was sort of double locked. So I went round the back door, and on this occasion he'd gone on a bender. And this is 1986, so there are no mobile phones, and you know, kids don't ring home. So I'd gone straight to debating. My sister had come home. She's a bit older. Mum had sent her to her girlfriend's. My brother had come home from school, and Mum had sent her to him to Dad's. So I came home at, I don't know, 9 o'clock, 9:30, 10 o'clock, middle of winter, and on this occasion he'd hit her right in the face. And I said, "Mum, we're out of here." And I got everything he owned. I put it all on the front balcony. We had a Federation semi in Haberfield. And I nailed every window shut. We went to my grandmother's. And he came around on the Sunday night. I don't know how he drove because he could barely walk. And he knocked on the door and Nan was here at the front door. I was standing about there. Mum was hiding in the house. And it's important to understand with my grandmother that she is about this tall. The French lacquered hair roll, French roll lacquered black gave her about another couple of inches. I couldn't understand when I was a kid, Craig, why other kids' grandmothers didn't have black hair, because my grandmother had black hair. Wonderful vanity that keeps you going. And he knocked. He said, "I'm here to see Judy." And my grandmother said, "Oh, fantastic. I've lived here 50 years. I've never had any trouble, and I'm not about to," and slammed the door in his face. So life went back to normal. He hated gays. We had two gay blokes living next door. We had a swing timber gate. He had bricked it up. He hated them that much. That whole family holiday thing, every other weekend we were at Auntie Tessie's or Uncle Eddie's or whatever. And you literary people may find this interesting. Scrabble was a blood sport in our family. He wasn't good at Scrabble, so we were withdrawn from the family. Mum went back to all the cousins, her sisters and brothers, but she'd been withdrawn from all her friends. He just shrunk her world. So the whole world opened up again. Then, before mobile phones, of course, we get through that period and we're into the next year, and Mum's having very whispered conversations in the lounge room, and my brother and sister and I said, he's going to come back. So of course he comes back. And we just said, we're leaving, we're out of here. And we left, and I went to live with my grandmother, who was, never do your dirty washing in public. She was old school, serious old school. Never talked to me about what happened. I had nothing to do with my mother for a couple of years. But what I did with all that anger, with all of that depression, trauma, and with the suicidality, it's interesting, I turned 50 a couple of years ago, and I think you say to yourself, oh, this is nothing, But of course, it becomes a very reflective number. And I thought back, particularly thinking of books and my own experience, and I realised I had suicidality from the age of 10-ish, because that was my answer to the yelling and the fighting and the abuse. Because when he turned her against her in particular, she'd scream at us, and it's just terrible. And constant and abusive and all of those sorts of things. And my view, if this gets too bad, I'll kill myself. Now, I never made a plan. I don't even think I knew what that really meant. But it had been a part of my makeup. So I just pushed all that down, and I became very interested in politics. I joined the Liberal Party at the age of 17 in my school uniform. I went to Nan. I told Nan proudly I joined the Liberal Party. She said, "That's all right, love. That's a passing phase you'll go through." And Auntie Kate, my grandfather's cousin, lived next door, and she was great. She was old, frailer, thick glasses like that, the bottle of whiskey, the Lucky Strikes, and the phone to do a TAB betting. And she cried, "Oh, what have you done? What have you done?" So I became very interested in politics. My drive for that was the drive that what happened to me, and I guess what happened to Mum, should never be able to happen to other people. But I became a very angry, driven young man. And that developed, I ran for pre-selection at 22, 24, 26, and won the pre-selection for the seat of Pittwater. When I jumped in the car with our son Hugh today, the sat-nav said it was 10 minutes away, which it would be if you'd laid on a helicopter. Anyway, so I got elected to a very safe seat. I mean, it's just gone independent, but a very safe seat at the age of 27, and everything was laid out quite well in front of me. We were in opposition. You move faster in opposition than you do in government. At 30, I was a shadow minister, and at 33, I was the leader of the opposition on my 33rd birthday, by great coincidence. And I was miserably unhappy behind the scenes. Excuse my language, I'd shit, shower and shave, and you had a uniform in the cops, I had a white shirt, a tie and a suit, and you go and stand in Parliament, you do your bit, you go at the back and you do your press conferences and you give your speeches. And I started getting pretty good I thought, at being opposition leader and, on my way to being Premier. We lost the election in 2003 against Bob Carr. I always knew that would happen. I always knew this was a two-step arrangement, and I was on track, I think, We were heading the polls from time to time to win in 2007. But I had pushed all that down, and I was incredibly angry. I always take a chance to apologise to my staff. I'd yell at my staff. I'd scream at them. All of that tension. And I like to think this audience will understand this image. I felt like I was on a record. I was on a record with a record player going faster and faster, and I was skidding out to the side, and something was going to go wrong. Something was going to go wrong. My wife Lucy sort of sat there just completely white-knuckled for the ride. You know, she just thought there's something wrong here. So, you know, I'd be working 6 and 7 days a week and 6 and 7 nights a week as opposition leader, and you know, if somebody rang up and said, "Oh look, that thing next week, John, is cancelled. You don't need to come." Normal people would say, "You beaut, that's a night at home." I'd say to my staff, "Go back, look in the diary, see what else I said no to. You know what? Or we'll take some journalists to dinner, or I'll go to Blacktown, whatever." So I was almost manic in that sense. My skin got thinner, not thicker, in politics, because I became more sensitive to criticism because I thought I was doing better and better. But, you know, the journos go you all the time, so I couldn't see that, despite the polls and other things getting better. So I had pushed all of that down. All of these moments, all of these things in life lead a moment of humour to get you through. So Lucy did some research and worked out that bananas are good for dealing with depression. So without my knowledge, we had banana cake, banana bread, banana this, banana that. We later read years on that you have to eat your body weight daily in bananas for it to make any difference. So Lucy was really worried. Anyway, there was a public event in the middle of 2005, 3 and a bit years into, 3 and more years into my leadership. It's a public event where I said and did some stupid things. I drank, but I didn't drink too much. And I say that because I've never blamed the grog. I think people... There are a lot of lazy story writers in the media, and they want to box you. You know, oh, he'd had 3 beers. Well, I wasn't off my head after 3 beers, so I never blamed the alcohol, and I just became uninhibited and said and did some stupid things. They came out, and I resigned at the leadership, but I stayed in Parliament. And then the next day there was a full-on tabloid attack on me. And to give you an example, it was a dirt sheet, effectively. And one of the things in there was that, and it had all been leaked, I think, out of my office or something. I've got a view who I think it was. But anyway, one of the things that was in there was, you know, Brogden had to be told not to take his young, attractive executive assistant on country visits. The real story was my young, attractive executive assistant was a country girl who wanted to go on country visits with me. And I said, yeah, that's a great look. We leave the Tamworth Rotary Club dinner at 10:30 and go back to the same motel together. I don't think that's going to look good. So somebody had twisted, and it was 6:15 on a Tuesday night, standing at home. We had one child. Flinders was 18 months old. Lucy was pregnant with Hugh. And I came to the immediate view that I couldn't get through this, that I'd have to wade up to here in the mud and sludge to be able to say, that didn't happen. This is actually what happened. Like, I couldn't get through it. I had hoped that I'd go to the backbench, take my lumps, as Menzies once said when he lost government in 41, and maybe come back later on and have a senior portfolio if we went into government or something. That's what I'd hoped for. But it just it went from bad to disastrous. And at that minute, I decided not simply the only thing to do, but the best thing to do was to kill myself. And I say that because, and I talk about this a bit in the book, I think we've had an enlightenment in the way we talk about mental health in the last 20 years in particular, and in suicide as well, although suicide's very different, and I'll come to that. So I thought I was such a burden on Lucy and friends and family. I thought that I had brought such shame to them. I had members of Parliament coming in my office before I resigned as leadership, yelling at me, telling me not to resign. And I've often said, if it was you, Craig, and I was advising you, I could have got you through. I just couldn't get myself through. I could have got you through, but not myself. So there was no push for me to go, but it all fell to pieces. And I thought, I've got to alleviate this shame and this burden. this embarrassment to my wife and my family and my supporters and my friends. So I worked out what I wanted to do, and I lied to Lucy. I said, I've got to go down to my office, my electorate office, and rang a priest, a friend of mine who was a priest, and said, I'd like to give you my confession. He said, John, the Vatican hasn't caught up with mobile technology. I can't take a confession over the phone. So I went to the local, to Mona Vale, Sacred Heart Mona Vale. The priest was there. And I felt sorry for that priest because he knew what was going on, but of course he couldn't tell anyone. So I then went across to Woolies. I bought what I wanted to take my own life. Interestingly, the media had followed me, and I went to my office and started to kill myself. And thankfully, by a confluence of events, the media being there, the cops turned up, one of my staff turned up, and they were able to get in and stop me and take me to hospital. And, you know, you have this extraordinary thought of, shit, I can't even kill myself properly. You know, like I can't even do this properly. So they scheduled me under the Mental Health Act. They asked two questions: are you a risk to yourself and are you a risk to others? The answer was yes. They scheduled me. There's a box I can tick. And then I went across to a place called the Northside Clinic, which is the old one, which was just back a bit from the other side of the Pacific Highway from Royal North Shore. And one very wonderful thing happened. So Morris Yema had just become the Premier. He laid on the police, and he was unbelievable, right? He gave us, well, Lucy, I mean, I wasn't. He gave Lucy everything she needed, and the police looked after us really well. But there was a small leak as to where I was at the beginning, and that leak was to Mari Bashir, the former Governor of New South Wales, who is a professor of psychology. So I walked into my suicide watch room where they take, you know, cords and belts and all that away from you, and your room's got a glass panel in it, and they're keeping an eye on you all the time, and there are alarms if you leave, all that sort of stuff. And there was this magnificent bunch of flowers from Mari, and I've never forgotten that act of kindness. So I was there for, in the end, a week. My problem was, and we sacked the psychiatrist, my problem was the psychiatrist we got given was interested in managing my public persona, not my private mental health. But the worst thing that happened is, you know, it's like a 2 or 3 star motel. I said to the doctor, it's pretty miserable in here. He said, yes, we don't want you to get comfortable and stay. Fair enough. But you do get cocooned very quickly in a clinic. I found, you know, your meals are brought to you, medication's brought to you, you're looked after, it's a small space. And I got cocooned very quickly. I'll come back to that. So about 2 days in, I had no idea where my room was, but the room looked over the driveway to the clinic. And I had no idea, but the media had been hanging around, so they'd worked out, I mean, they'd probably made an educated guess where I was. You know, you think I hate the media after this. I don't. I don't hate media. I do, you know. There are some people I'd never wish to see again in my life. A journalist tried to impersonate a member of my family to get into the clinic. Now, thank goodness they have famous people often, so they knew what was going on. And the worst part was about 2 days in, I finally felt like I could have a shower, and you know, I've got bandages on my wrist and all that sort of stuff, reasonably heavily medicated. And this happened without this was happening without me knowing, but I'll tell you what I heard. So to their credit, the staff said, like, you know, Lucy was being chased endlessly and they were outside our house, and one of the neighbours hosed their cameras, which were about $30,000, told them to bugger off. The neighbours were fantastic. One lady up the road broke into our house to clean it. You know, the fridge was full of food. It was a wonderful, you know. So this is happening. The staff are saying, go away, just leave him alone, go away. And I heard this, and I don't say this in the book, I don't think, but I heard somebody yell out, and I don't know who it was, I don't know if it was a cameraman or it was a male voice cameraman or a journo, but I heard this. Better luck next time, John, try harder next time. And, you know, you think to yourself, surely it can't get any worse, and it did. The new psychiatrist I had, when we sacked the first one, just got to tell you this. So the first guy came in, and as he arrived, he said, oh, when I heard the radio this morning, I thought I'd be seeing you today. I thought, okay, it's a big ego. Anyway, when he came back later in the whole episode and said, "Oh, John, look, I do some commentary for Radio National, and they're asking me about," his psychiatrist, "they're asking me about Mark Latham's mental state. And I wondered, John, if I could say I'm treating you." I said, "No." And Lucy was sitting next to me and thought, he didn't say that. I didn't hear that. Then we got to the end of the session and he said, "I just want to ask you again, John, and we sacked him on the spot. Just extreme. I got this wonderful Dr. Peter Klug, beautiful man, the second one. And he used this, it's a Persian phrase I've since discovered. "John, things will get better. This too will pass, things will get better." And I remember sitting there, and I didn't verbalise it, screaming at him in my head saying, "How can you say that? Everything I've always wanted." I was in Parliament for my 10-year school reunion. If you bump people I go to school with, they would say, "I thought he would have been there, 5 years earlier." I don't mean that arrogantly. I was so focused, right? I was on track. At 33, I was on track. And my opponent, Bob Carr, had retired. Often it's, a long-term leader retires, then the party gets blah, blah, blah. That opens up the chance for the opposition. I mean, the gates of victory were opening up in front of me. So my message is, Craig, he was right. Things can and do get better. And if I ever write an autobiography, the title of the autobiography will be based on this letter that I received. So in the weeks that followed, and we've still got them all at home, Lucy and I received emails, faxes. Some audiences I have to explain what a fax is. I think I'll get away with it today. Emails, faxes, letters, cards, prayers from 10,000. We've got 10,000 of them. Not one of them negative. Now the one that was the most spectacular was on a piece of green fluoro paper. And it was a bloke, the address at the top was Post Restaurant, Darwin, Northern Territory. So I learnt this means he's travelling around, going back to the GPO to get his mail. So, think of Albie Mangles or somebody. So I have this vision in my mind of this bloke in a hat and, a real bushy. And my name's John Brogden, Brogden. So the letter said, "Dear Mr. Ogden, comma, we all make mistakes. That's why pencils have rubbers on the other end, full stop." And I've given this speech once in America. I had to change the rubbers reference because I had to, erasers on the other end. That's my lesson of life. So I had a lot of love, a lot of support. I had good doctors. I had spectacular nurses. The doctor I had said to me, "I'm not going to diagnose you with depression straight away. You need to settle down. We need all of this stuff to settle down." So I resigned from Parliament. Hugh was born. We share a birthday. Life started getting back. And I found that I couldn't, it was a classic sawtooth recovery. So, couldn't leave home for weeks and weeks. I couldn't read the newspapers for years. Didn't want to watch the news, those sorts of things. It was that trauma of the media. So I'd get out of home, get in the car, couldn't go down the street, couldn't get out of the car. And it was interesting. For months and months, I would walk along looking at the ground. I didn't feel worthy to look people in the eye. And almost every day I was out and about, Craig, somebody would stop me in the street and say, "Hi, John, I've been what you've been through," or "My brother took his," whatever. And that was the same message. You made a stupid mistake, you paid a very high price. Some would say you were beaten up in the media and all the party and all that sort of stuff, but you deserve a second chance. And that's very much the case. That was a fascinating experience too. So this is almost 20 years ago in terms of community attitude. So only two people really, really made me feel uncomfortable. They were both employment people, search agents. And one of them saw me, and I'm sure he only saw me to be a voyeur so he could go to dinner at Mossman or something and say, "Oh yes, he's hopeless." And the other guy said, "You'll never work again." Which wasn't true and was pretty harsh. So they set me back a bit. But I was walking through the city on my task to find a job, And bearing in mind, this is all I've ever wanted to do, right? So I remember one of my staff saying to me, what are you going to do when you leave politics? I said, that's the problem. I've got no idea what I want to do and I want to be here for a long time. So I kept looking, and this bloke stopped me on O'Connell Street. So O'Connell Street's a very old school business, offices in the old days, and this bloke was it's a very small street, O'Connell Street in the city, and he said, this guy yells from across the road, John, makes a beeline for me, and he would have been in his 70s, suit and tie. And he said, John, it's great to see you. It's great to see you again looking so well. I used to see you all of those Liberal Party events. It's fantastic to see you. Then he pulled me in close and said, I spent 3 weeks in the Northside Clinic last year. Anyway, John, it's great to see you. And that was a generational thing of that generation that, didn't talk about it. And John Howard was part of that generation. I remember he started rolling in terms of mental health money. He started that to his credit. But I remember he gave a press conference once and he said, so, just some of these people just need to get off the lounge and get moving. Like, that was his generation. I don't blame him for that. But even that's changed because grandparents see their kids and their grandkids. The biggest growth in age groups in suicide in Australia, youth suicides are dropping, thank God. Men over 60 and 70 is where the increase is. And you'll know that yourself. And I think there are a number of reasons for that, not the least of which is men see themselves through their job and their career. You women are much smarter. You see yourselves through your life. But when you go from being an inspector and making big decisions and tomorrow you've just got to work out when you tee off, that's bad for men. Men should never properly retire even if they volunteer. They should never retire. So the only other funny story is when the by-election was called, I sort of came back into the public eye again, telling the story, the media, and I was shopping in Coles at Mona Vale, and this woman came up to me and said, now, love, and she grabbed me on the arm, she said, love, you didn't say those things that they say you said in the media, you didn't say those things. I said, look, and I thought, oh God, I'm going to have to tell her the truth. I said, yes, look, I did say those things. And she looked at me and she walked away. I thought, oh, no. And she spun back around and said, they must have spiked your drink. And off she went. Off she went. So what I've found over 20 years is extraordinary empathy, extraordinary understanding. I've never hidden my suicide attempt. I've never pretended it didn't happen. I've never hidden my suicidality or my mental health. Why? Because it was all public. And my son's here, but we knew one day they'll Google it and find out, and better they hear from us and know that what happened. But watching and I guess in some way being part of that great change through 10 years as the chair of Lifeline, and what an incredible organisation Lifeline is, and working with that. But Craig, as you know, the challenge we have is suicide numbers are very stubborn. In Australia today, on average, 9 Australians will take their lives, 7 men, 2 women. Men use more certain methods of suicide, but more women attempt suicide. And that's the average, and that hasn't dropped for a long time. And about half of that people die on the roads across Australia every year. Think of how much we talk about road deaths and road rules. And about 4 people, sadly, die by shark attacks every year. That leads the news for about a week. Imagine if I'm a bit of an advocate for the suicide toll being published the way the road toll is being published, because and Indigenous people, it's double harder. It's all the things you'd think it is. Country people is higher. Indigenous people, as I said, double. We need to get a bit angrier and do something more. And it's not only more funding and more services and more connected services. It's also us as a community doing more and reaching out and helping people. So not every answer will be that long.
Beautiful, mate. So, thank you for sharing that. And can you imagine that conversation happening on stage 20, 30 years ago? Okay, so things have changed a lot, and a lot of that is due to the work of people like John, who were pioneers back then in actually publicly talking about their own experiences about mental health, which is important as well. And what he's also demonstrated is something I learned as a detective in the police: you never write down a list of questions you're going to ask, because the answer to the first one will blow out all the rest. So But I don't want to one-up you.
And you never interrupt
No,
somebody
no.
if they're telling you they're a crook. You never interrupt them.
This
That's
could
right.
be one of the easiest first moderating jobs I've ever had, because you can talk, so that's a good thing. But I don't want to one-up you on childhood trauma at all, John, but I do want to come back to the Devon sandwiches. My mum used to make a week load of Devon and tomato sauce sandwiches and wrap them individually and freeze them in the deep freezer, and then we had to take them to school. Oh yeah, so defrosted tomato sauce in white bread, so good. Anyway, so look, we better come back to the book and talk a little bit about that as well, but there's some common themes in your story that I think to some of the people that you've interviewed. Now, I think one of the things that I think is a strong point in this book is the fact that you've included the stories of such a massive cross-section of Australia. Like there's a story of a farmer, there is a story of a couple of Indigenous people in it. There's a high-profile businessman, James Packer, is in there. He shared his story. World champion surfer, Lane Beachley, Ian Thorpe, everyone household name. Preston Campbell, rugby league, such a massive diversity of people there. And I think your story, and I talk about this a lot in mental health in general with the work I do, but and I had a lot of these experiences in the police too with childhood trauma, is such a massive thing. And a lot of people define childhood trauma as sexual abuse and physical abuse and those sorts of things, but it's way deeper than that. And I think, I think you articulate it so well there that the way we grow as kids, like basically we are a mush of neurons in our brains when we're kids, and all the life experiences we have growing up wires our brains up. And the way your brain gets wired up is as a child, and that's through the environment that you're brought up in, has a massive impact on the way you deal with stuff later on in life. It's hardwired into you. Which is why, I'm a massive supporter of advocacy for childhood trauma, but trauma's not just those things. It's the sort of things you're exposed to, the sort of horrible experiences that you had as well. Lane Beachley, most people would not have a clue of her background. Share a bit of her story.
So Lane Beachley, friend of mine for a long time, fantastic. You look at her today and you think she could still jump on a surfboard and win a world record. And she's sort of, remember that movie Cocoon where, she's like, she's just got this spirit that, fantastic. So Lane would be about my age, maybe a bit older, and she was adopted. And she was adopted by lovely people, and there was no issue from the adoption. But her birth mother had been raped. And therefore there was no contact, as a child. You wouldn't legitimise any of that. And later in life, the mother tracked her down, and that was a traumatic relationship. The extraordinary thing, as a ex-copper, the extraordinary thing was 3 men reached out claiming to be her father, and all had to say, I didn't rape your mother, and I'm your father. So that became an incredibly complex situation. But she has this great line where she was sort of 10 or 12 and said, Dad, why don't I look like my brother? And he said, I've been waiting for this conversation, and she went through that experience. I'm the special, I'm the chosen one, and the ups and downs of that. Phenomenal determination. Her suicidality came from the physical side of surfing and how that knocked her about with things like fatigue, chronic fatigue, and also we look back at Lane and think, oh, she must have made millions out of surfing. She won 3 in a row to start with. When she came back from the third one, she was still working 3 part-time jobs around Curl and Manly, right? So no money. Contrast Ian Thorpe. Ian, you might think, well, clearly, there was all that, is he gay, isn't he gay, and all the innuendo that he's gay. At 15, a journalist was sent to a swim meet to ask him if he was gay, on the threat that the journo would be sacked if he didn't ask the question. Ian said, great answer, I don't know, I'm too busy swimming. His general answer to this is a fantastic answer in 2024, which is, it's no one else's business. And you think, actually, It's no one else's business. He is extraordinarily recognisable. So, you know, James Packer, you say to James, tell me about your business successes. He talks about OneTel. Who remembers OneTel? Right. I gave a speech to a group of a lot of younger people in the business. I said, who remembers OneTel? 2 hands of some older guys went up. I said, okay. Who knows who Ian Thorpe is? Every hand went up. Ian hasn't swum for 20 years, right? 20 years. He's globally famous, goes to Japan, he's mobbed. So how do you go down and buy your bread and milk if you're Ian Thorpe, particularly with people wanting bloody selfies and all that sort of stuff? The thing that turned him wasn't having to come out of the closet and all that sort of stuff. That's in there. That's a fascinating story. He came out and told the world he was gay on Michael Parkinson. And he has this great line where he rang up Michael Parkinson 2 days before and said, you might want to ask me this question. And Michael Parkinson said, what will the answer be? Anyway, he knew what the answer would be. So, you know, what 30-year-old Australian goes on Michael Parkinson? That's how famous he is. But the thing that sent him to the edge was, you might remember he had a negative test for drugs, or a positive test for drugs at one stage, which was later overturned. And all his enemies came out, you know, we've always, all that sort of stuff. So those stories are there, particularly the James Packer story, who, James is worth $4 or $5 billion. His mental health as such, he's weighing in at, so he's got 2 inches on me, he'd be about 6'4". He's weighing in at about 175 kilos. He's tried every medication you like. You know, he's the great example of privilege and money doesn't mean you're not susceptible to suicidal thoughts.
You know, I think with James as well, and even though, you know, he only shares a little bit of his experience in the book, living under the cloud, I suppose, or the I don't know, the example of his dad. Yeah. The amount of the amount of pressure he would have put on himself to try to live up to his dad's standard and reputation, etc. I mean, that would have, even as a child, I think even that would be a traumatic experience for someone. Well,
he's richer. I don't know about sort of if you did it in a proportional test or with time, but he's richer than his old man was. Sadly, he's almost become a hermit. He lives in Argentina, a quarter of the year Mexico, on his boat, or in Aspen. And you go to see him. You know, I don't mean that in a silly sense. He was in Sydney for 2 weeks. He basically to see his mum, who's not great, and he didn't leave the apartment. You know, so he's got all the trappings of wealth, all of the trappings of wealth, and he's quite smart. Kerry told everybody he was an idiot. He's actually quite smart, but he said, "I'm not as good a businessman as my father." So that sort of hangs over him.
You know, I've travelled to a lot of third world countries, or developing countries they call them now, over my life, and one of the things I've always struck me is how happy people appear to be in those sort of, you know, even in back villages of Papua New Guinea or West Timor or wherever else. And even though poverty can bring its fair share of misery, so can excess in wealth, which I think is probably driving a lot of the mental health problems we've got in Western society these days, which is a big thing as well. But one of the things, coming back to the book, I mean, in the title itself, Profiles in Hope, that word hope, I think, is a very important factor in this book. And I mentioned to John the other day, when I was talking to him on the phone, is that what I loved about it was that even though the stories are short, all these people that have had the experience of suicide and mental health problems, for whatever reason, and particularly those who have had traumatic life experiences, none of them see themselves as victims.
Yes, you did make that point, and it hadn't struck me, and you're right.
It's a really important thing, and I don't know and I think this defines you as well. It definitely defines me and many of the people in the book. Is that back in the 90s, there was 2 psychologists called Tedeschi and Calhoun, and they wrote a paper on this, and they called it they called it post-traumatic growth, basically, rather than post-traumatic stress disorder and all those sort of things. Post-traumatic growth, and what that was doing is describing how people with significant life adversities and challenges can sort of rise above them, and then not only rise above them, and then turn those experiences around to actually help other people get through as well. And I think there's quite a few stories in the book that relate to that.
So I should say that the book that you're all about to buy, because all of the no, I don't make $1 out of this book. All the royalties go to Lifeline. This has cost me money to do this book and cost me time, for which I'm not in any way upset, but it's been a hell of a lot of work and a journey. The book is Q&A style, and I came to that conclusion because I wanted them to be their words. Their words are more powerful than my interpretation of their words. So there's a woman in here called Pat Hall. Pat's had that similar, Pat's 70 now, left school early, got married, had 3 kids, had an administrative job, very smart lady. Her husband left her. I mean, her husband had an affair literally with a lady across the street and left her. And that just destroyed her life, just shattered everything in her life. And I actually say, you could almost say her life is boring, to be honest. You'd say that today, but that was her trajectory, right? That's what she had expected from the day she could remember. So she became suicidal, and she rang up her sister. Sorry, she sent the 3 sons out with their father for the day. This is a Saturday, I think. Rang her sister and said, "Look, I'm really good today. I'm feeling really good today, right?" Then locked every window in the house and went into the bathroom to start to kill herself. And her sister said, "There's something wrong. That didn't make sense, that phone call." So she rang a neighbour. Pat says that there's only one window in the house that was never opened, and for some reason it was open. They pushed a young girl through the window who went and opened the front door, and they were able to save Pat. Pat had a bit of a hippie recovery. It's quite an interesting recovery. She now runs a thing called the Liverpool Neighbourhood Connections, and it's in Warwick Farm, tough territory. She takes mostly women. She takes them refugees right off the boat, low-skilled people. She takes women who, coming out of incredible domestic violence situations. Now, I don't think $4.5 a lot of money, but if you donated $4.5 to Pat, it's like you donated $4.5 million, because she can take that and get one of her women a TAFE course to be a barista or something. Then she helps them get a coffee cart, and then she helps them get the contract at the Liverpool Soccer Club to do the coffee cart and all that sort of stuff. So she's dragging, she's helping these people out of poverty, which is incredible. And look, I said this the other night, people didn't think it was funny or practical, but you know how lots of charities won't take lots of stuff these days? No, we don't want that on. I said, "Pat, we've got some stuff, do you really want it?" She said, "Listen, these people have got nothing. They'll take it." Very old school practical stuff. So she's turned her life around. Probably the story that is the most extraordinary and literally took my breath away, literally. So there's a young bloke in there called Matt Caruana. So Matt's 24 now. He was 16 when this happened. So he was living 2 lives. So young, good-looking bloke, went to a regional Catholic high school in northwestern Sydney. Dad Maltese, second generation, tradesman, mum Greek, did the books for the business. A younger brother and a younger sister he had. So he dabbled in drugs a bit of selling drugs, bit of using drugs at school, did a lot of DJing, somewhat popular, and decided that he wanted to reach a bodybuilding objective. And so he set off on that. He put on 30 kilos. I mean, you and I do this every day, Craig. Put on 30 kilos and stripped down 20 of those kilos to have this most extraordinary body. Go and look at him online, Matt Caruana, this incredible body. And took a photo of himself and put it on social media. So tick. At the same time, he felt such a burden, such a lack of self-worth, that he had determined he was going to kill himself, and he kept going to the place where he was going to kill himself regularly. Now, you'll notice I'm not talking about the means of suicide. We don't talk about the means of suicide because that is risky for people who find themselves in crisis. Some call it a copycat risk. So he went to the place, he kept checking it, he went to there 2 and 3 times a week to work out the most effective way to take his own life, to kill himself. A week after he posted the incredible photo on social media, tried to take his own life. Woke up a few days later in the spinal unit at Royal North Shore never to walk again, completely severed spine. He for the 3 months he was in the spinal ward, he would say to people, I've had an accident or I've had an injury. Could not say, I tried to kill myself. It was obvious he tried to kill himself. I mean, there was no doubt. But I've had an accident, I've had an injury. They were so worried about his mental health, that question, you risk to yourself or others. He had the same experience. I can't even get this right. I can't even get this right. So they transferred him after a few months into the psych ward to keep him because they were so worried about him. And they got to a day where they said, look, you're doing okay, mate. Why don't you have a day out with your mother and go and do something, you know? So it was 8 years ago. He said, I want to go out and get some piercings. Fair enough. So he went out to Penrith and they got some piercings. And on the way back on the train, now this is, there are some parts of this book, if you're a fiction writer, you wouldn't write. You couldn't write. You couldn't believe they happened, right? So they pull up at Mount Druitt. So it's a classic, 2-deck with one flat deck at each end. Doors open, there's Matt in the wheelchair and his mum sitting on the seat. And this bloke walks in to the train and says, Jesus, what happened to you? And he said, well, I tried to kill myself. First time ever he admitted it. So the bloke wandered down and sat opposite him and said, well, what are you going to do about it? Change his life. Now, we're on a worldwide search to find out who this bloody guy was because he's a philosopher king, right? And Matt says that, I'd love to meet this guy because he turned my life around. So jump 8 years ahead, when I was interviewing Matt, I got to the end and I said, I've asked this question of a few people, not everybody, but I've asked this of a few people, and it might be a bit counterintuitive. And it's particularly relevant to you, Matt, because of your mobility. I didn't say because you're in a wheelchair. I wanted to be gentle because of your mobility. And he said, I'll come back to that. He said, the question was, did you have to get to this point to come back, right? Did it have to get that bad to come back? Which is a common experience, which is a sad experience in the sense that does it have to actually get that bad before you can come back? He said yes, and he talked about that. Then he said, and by the way, I'm going to walk again. And I thought, good on you, young fella. You're never going to walk again, but good on you for that hope, great hope. So he said he pushed himself back from the table, wheelchair, never to walk again, lifted this leg to here, lifted that leg to there, and took my breath away. Then he got his phone and opened up a video of him that morning over at the Royal Ride Rehab, where he was in like an exoskeleton where it's linked to the roof, learning to walk again. And I said, you know what, mate? I said, you're 24, it's 2024. You have incredible determination, incredible mindset about, he says how privileged he is. He talks about privilege, right? Extraordinary. I said, you will walk again with the technology. You will walk again. They'll work out how, in whatever form you'll walk again. And he's the most humble young bloke. Determination. So he's now got this body back. His legs are withered away from lack of being able to work them. He's got this chest back again. And the Insight program, which is like Channel 7, 60 Minutes, did James Packer, Jackie Lambie, who's in the book, and Matt. And he lives at Bondi, and he last year won the Guinness World Book of Records for the greatest number of towel lifts, not by a disabled person, by anyone. So this is where you put a towel over a rod like that, and you use both ends of the towel to pull yourself up. The world record for anyone, not a disabled person. So we go down to Bondi, and the woman who was the producer from Channel 7 was about 67, and she said, I don't want to sound like and the footage was going to be him doing lifts, right, down at that open gym at Bondi. She said, I don't want to sound like a pervy old woman, but could you do it with your shirt off? So let me tell you, that shirt came off in a second. He was quite happy, and he's got this phenomenal... So he is just this extraordinary, he embodies the hope that you... And the reason I wrote the book is when you're in that dark spot, you don't think there is hope. You don't think anyone cares. And there is hope because we have to give people hope to get through this part of their life.
Absolutely, mate. Well said. I could talk about this for a whole day. It's definitely a subject that's close to my heart. But we've only got a little bit of time left. We've got roving mics out there. Really want to give you guys in the audience a chance to ask questions too. Has anyone got any? We've got a couple of hands going up. So we've got a few minutes. We'll just get one or two of those questions through.
Thanks so much, John. This is more a comment than a question. My dad was a St Patrick's boy from Strathfield.
Well, we like to say that we are distinguished by the fact that we can't read and write, but we do know how to take a beating. That's the distinguish of a Christian Brothers old boy.
Yeah, that sounds accurate.
He might be a bit older than me, I'm guessing.
Yeah, he's almost 40 years older than you, but he greatly admired you, and he was a dyed-in-the-wool Liberal voter. But when you resigned, I wouldn't say my dad was the most empathetic man, but he sent you a beautiful letter.
Oh,
so
lovely.
one of the 10,000.
Oh, isn't that wonderful? Thank you.
So, yeah, he greatly admired you.
Please say thank you. Yeah, and he's still alive and going, which is fantastic. No. Oh, sorry. I just thought he was still alive the way he said that. Can somebody give Russell the microphone at the end, right at the back, please? Yes. Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask you, could you please complete that quote that you just finished with? Because I would like to send that to my son who's been in that place too.
Which quote was that? Sorry.
You ended up with...
About hope.
When you're in that dark spot, you think there's no hope. But
Yeah, and there is. People care. People always care. There's always someone there. And you might think you've burnt your bridges, and you often do, right? You know, you've done drugs, or you've embezzled from the business, you've had an affair, you've beaten your kids, you know. But you know, look, God bless us. We sort of all love our family, but there's a point where you say, I can't take this any longer. But there's always lifeline. There's always help there, and people. Churchill said democracy is the worst form of government in the world, except for all the others. We have the worst mental health system in the world, except for all the others. I mean, I've travelled the world with Lifeline International, and I can tell you, with the exception of the UK, where it's called the Samaritans, Good Samaritan, there's no single national, well-funded, high-profile Lifeline in Argentina or other places around the world. What we have here is pretty good. The biggest problem we have in the mental health system is falling between the cracks. And that's where a lot of work has to be done. Hello, Russell.
John, your trouble is you don't have enough mongrel in you. You're basically a very kind, good person. But my question is, religion was a very important part of your life, and I recall in your maiden speech you talked about your religious education and how powerful the church was in your life. And you also talked about the fact that on the day that you attempted to take your life, you wanted to make your confession. You may prefer not to answer this question now, but I'll ask it anyway. How important was your belief and your Catholicity in relation to this journey that you're carrying?
Just to add to that, Russell, you know, one of my very best friends worked at a Catholic school, and when all this happened, he said, "What do you need anything?" Of course. And when I was in the clinic, and I said, "Can you arrange a priest to come and say mass for me?" So that's how important that was, and take my confession. So, look, we weren't. Dad is a Protestant, Mum was Catholic. We weren't a every Sunday church-going family. Some might say we were. The conservatives in the Catholic Church would call me a cultural Catholic, probably. But having grown up in that world, it did mean something to me. And you know, during those incredibly difficult times at home, my school was very good to me. And my mother would be embarrassed if she was alive if I said this. I'm sure I left school without her being able to pay the fees, you know, and she had to pay them monthly because she couldn't pay them every third term as it was in the day. They knew what was going on, and they were very good. They were very good. I mean, for all the bad stuff about religious people, they were good to me, incredible. And I felt the benefit of that. I also felt the benefit of the fact that I went to a more expensive school. I should have gone to De La Salle Ashfield or Christian Brothers Lewisham. I could have walked to De La Salle Ashfield when we lived in Haberfield. But Mum, without the money to do it, made sure I went to a better school so I could have better opportunities. So it was important to me in its own way, which is interesting, Russell, because what I did in the black letter law of the church is commit a sin. Suicide's a sin. The Reverend Dr. Alan Walker, those with a fair bit of grey hair might remember Alan Walker. He was the Tim Costello of his time. He ran the Central Methodist Mission, now the Wesley Mission. He started Lifeline. So in 1961, a man rang him at his home in Gordon, where he was the superintendent, great old Freo superintendent. And he got a phone call from a bloke who said, "You don't know who I am, my name's Roy, and I want to talk to you, I'm going to kill myself." 2 or 3 days later, the police at King's Cross rang him and said, "Are you Alan Walker?" "Yes, I am." He said, "There's a dead body here with a letter on the chest addressed to you." And to our eternal gratitude and to his, based on his inspiration, Lifeline started on the 16th of March 1963. It's been going for 24 hours a day ever since. And the significance of that story is when Lifeline started, suicide was a sin in every faith, let alone every Christian church, and he ran the Methodist Central Mission. And it was still a crime in many jurisdictions. You're too young as a copper, but coppers who are well retired now, they would turn up to the site of a suicide and rearrange the body so that the family didn't have to have the shame. They'd cut down the body or whatever, and the magistrate would give a wink, and the doctor and the ambos would give a wink, and it was so that the family didn't have the shame. If you're Catholic, you couldn't have a Catholic mass or any religion if you died by suicide or buried. So for me, look, it was important, Russell, and I'm probably it's usually there for me when I need it in trouble, rather than me doing my bit when I don't need it, which doesn't make me different from a whole lot of people. But yeah, thanks for that question.
Good answer. Just on that, on religion, and I'm not a really religious person. The Catholic education system took care of that for me too. But it is from research. People of faith have much better mental health outcomes than people who don't. They've got much more hope in life and afterlife, and also they have a better sense of meaning, purpose, and community, and a whole stack of other stuff too.
And
which
faith's
is very
a broad phrase.
Yeah, absolutely, it can mean lots of things. Lots of things. Got time for just one more question, and we'll have to really squeeze this one in. Yeah, over here.
There's the microphone.
Just very quickly, my son was the reverse. He wasn't religious. He had an episode and he found hope through religion, and that's kept him, thank God for that. My question is, was your mother alive when this happened, and how did she react? If you're able to answer that.
Yes, she was.
I'm speaking now as a mother.
Yeah. She was alive, and she was embarrassed about it. She was embarrassed about it. She thought it reflected on her, and I guess it did, to be honest, in one sense. But she never talked to me about it, never. And I think that was a direct gift from her mother, my grandmother, which is you do your dirty washing in public. So for me, I did my dirty washing in public. She never admitted the domestic violence, the coercive control. And when the times got better and she re-established she married this guy, by the way. She married him. She married him. So I understand coercive control. I understand why these things happen in the sense that I've seen it. And that, the fear and the control through alcohol and all that sort of stuff, you would have seen it many times in your professional career. But she was embarrassed. So it was we didn't talk about it.
That is a really good question, and a good one to end up on too. But before we do, John, I've talked about a defined post-traumatic growth and what that means. And look, you've hit the lowest point, and you've risen above it. And not only that, but you've gone on. You work with Lifeline. John's work with Lifeline. It's not just getting up and like the amount of tens of millions of dollars he's raised for this important resource in the community. That's just indirectly through his connections and a whole stack of other stuff with government. Probably a lot more money than that, but probably more so for me, as far as value goes, it can't be defined in dollars and cents, is the fact that the work you've done over all that time in reducing stigma and raising awareness about this topic and changing cultural attitudes, mate, for me, that defines post-traumatic growth. And I really thank you for today. Definitely thank you for the book. It's such an important resource and one that I'm going to be promoting a lot through the work I do. So can everyone put their hands together for John, mate?